Hello and welcome to the TF1 show. I'm your host, Tinus Ferreira, the protective eyewear that can handle even the harshest of UV rays that is the world of F1. Now, it's another dreadful week without any Formula 1, and would you believe it, we are effectively halfway through the 2019 season, with 10 races now finished and 11 still to go. Therefore, while we are stuck in this joyless grey ether in the week between two races, I've decided to give you all my half-year report on how the drivers have performed over the first half of the season. So welcome everybody to the TF1 Top 10 Drivers of 2019 so far. Now, before I get into the list, let me quickly explain the things I considered when, ranking each of the drivers, and just the aspects of their performances that I felt would make the list accurate and representative of how the drivers have been doing over the past year. So obviously I looked at their qualifying performance. So in general, how fast they are in qualifying. Do they make any mistakes? Are they consistent? Do they outperform the car? And then also I looked at obviously how they did in the race. How's their racecraft? Again, do they make any mistakes? Do they gain more positions in average over the season than what they lose at the start? Do they have good, do they manage their tires well? Do they manage their fuel well? Do they manage strategy well? All of those things I think are very important in terms of assessing how a driver performs over the race. And then lastly, a few intangibles, I call it. And this you can break up into two things. So firstly, how is a driver performing against their teammates, so against the guy in equal machinery? And secondly, does the driver effectively outperform the car he's been given? So in other words, if his car is the 7th best, out of the 10 cars on the grid, is this guy every now and again still putting his car in the points or taking advantage of any potential opportunities during the race to actually really perform better than what the car is meant to do? Okay, so that's basically my criteria. So without any further ado, let's get into the list. And number 10, we have George Russell, who drives for the Williams team. Now, he's last year's Formula 2 champion, for those who didn't know. So in other words, he has some pedigree, I think you can call that. And he's coming off a very strong campaign in the Formula 2 season. And he's really shown himself to be a good and consistent driver despite some of the crazy difficulties that he's been having at the Williams team and that the team has been having overall. They're just very far behind the rest of the pack. So even though we rarely hear of George Russell and what he's doing in the race, I still think, he deserves to be on this list. Just because, if you think about qualifying, first of all, he's done all that he can. He performs consistently. He doesn't make any mistakes. He's clean. He really, gets the most out of that Williams more often than not. And I think we'll discuss a bit later how he's performed against his teammate. But I didn't really see him doing any better in qualifying than he's been doing. And then in terms of the race, he's been the one to take advantage of any other team's misfortunes, which I think is highlighted by a really good 14th place finish during the British Grand Prix last Sunday, where he finished ahead of Perez and Sebastian Vettel. Even though obviously they had, some incidents in the race, the fact that he puts himself in a position to capitalize on anyone else's misfortune is, again, really the most he can do in that Williams that he's been given. Now, in terms of his teammates, now Robert Kubica, I think we can all agree, has not been having the best of seasons. You can see he's obviously at some disadvantage with regards to his physical capabilities. But, George Russell has just been smashing him into the ground. He's constantly a half a second or more than half a second ahead of Kubica in qualifying. And I think Kubica has only beaten him once during the race. So if that's not domination, I don't know what is. And I think we need to assess George Russell's season so far at face value and say, it could have gone a lot worse for him, and he could have, had many problems and many difficulties in terms of getting used to the Formula One environment. But he's basically been flawless with what has been given. So I think that's why he deserves to be on this list. Now, next on the list might be a surprising one for some, but I think he's absolutely deserving to be here. Number 9 is Daniel Kvyat, who drives for Toro Rosso. And I mean, this is the comeback kid. After being dropped from Red Bull and then also Toro Rosso in 2016, so far in 2019, he's been consistent and at the same time still super fast, when he needs to be, or, on the odd occasion. And there's been a few standout performances over the past few races. I mean, his performance in Azerbaijan, his qualifying there was really impressive. And also his drive into the points during the British Grand Prix from 17th on the grid. I mean, that's an amazing performance for someone, that's sort of in a team nearer to the back of the midfield, and also in a midfield that is so competitive at the moment. In terms of his qualifying pace, I think he's still really quick over one lap, but that's always been the case. He's always been a very fast driver. But, in the past, he's been really inconsistent with how he, how often he puts in these performances. And I think there's still a level of inconsistency where he sometimes he can't string a good series of laps together. But then I think this year especially, he can be struggling, like hell all weekend. And then all of a sudden in qualifying, he can just pull out a lap out of the bag. And I think that's an enviable characteristic and something that could stand him in good stead in his career going forward. Now, I think in terms of the races, where it really has been a big difference for him compared to, Daniel Kvyat version 1 a few years ago. And that's just the fact that he's a lot more consistent. He doesn't go for the dive bomb moves every time. He's a bit more restrained. He's a bit more strategic when it comes to, making these choices and decisions in terms of when to go for a move or when to overtake or when not to overtake. And I think it's just, maturity and having a better head on his shoulders. And he's had a lot less retirements this year. And I think he's really building himself a very nice portfolio in terms of his racing ability. And I think his most recent race at Silverstone is absolutely an attestation to that. Now, I think also what's worth mentioning is he's been holding his own against a very talented teammate in Alex Albon, who, by the way, just missed out on this top 10 list. They've split qualifying honours 5-5, so Kvyat has out-qualified Albon 50% of the time, which basically means they're at deadlock there. But he has performed slightly better in the race than Albon, with Kvyat doing better 6 times out of the 10. So I think it's really nice to see Daniel Kvyat perform well this year after all of the drama a few years ago. And is another chance at Red Bull in his future? I think there's a chance if Gasly keeps going the way he's been going. But I think very important for Daniel Kvyat is he needs to keep up this level of consistency and this level of performances he's been putting in, because I do think that deep down, and well, I guess not deep down anymore, but he's a very talented guy. And I think given the right head on his shoulders and the right machinery, he can do some proper damage. Okay, now talking about doing proper damage and having a good head on your shoulders, I think number 8 needs no introduction. The old fox Kimi Räikkönen is on number 8 up to this point for the season. Now, we always knew Kimi had pedigree, and this year he's showing it once more. I always thought that the suffocating environment at Ferrari is really not what he needs, and I think that's always why he's sort of underperformed there. And I think now that he's back at Sauber, you can just see he's enjoying himself, he's driving free, and he's putting in really good performances. Now, in terms of qualifying, he's his normal fast, if unspectacular self. But I mean, he's consistently putting the Alfa Romeo in the top 10 in a very competitive midfield. He's not really putting in, one of those astonishing, amazing performances in qualifying. But, I mean, he's putting the car where it can be. He's maximizing the potential. He's always there to capitalize on someone else's mistake in qualifying. And I guess that's the same story in the race. It's just old Finnish consistency which has resulted in him being 8th in the championships and 2nd of the midfield drivers, just behind Carlos Sainz. Now, it doesn't matter what's happening in the race or what's happening around him. You'll always find him there in 7th, 8th or 9th place, keeping the young guns behind and pushing, the few in front. So, I mean, in terms of consistency and all-round good performances, he's really, really been delivering. And, measuring him against his much, much younger teammate and much less experienced teammates, Antonio Giovinazzi, he's outperforming him 6-4 in qualifying, which is a good track record for Raikkonen, and a whopping 9-1 in the race. So Raikkonen basically has outperformed Giovinazzi 9 out of the 10 times that they've raced together this year, which is, to say the least, quite convincing. So I think the wise old fox, Kimi Raikkonen, still has some speed in him left, still going into next year and in his Grand Tour, final send-off before he, walks into the sunset and goes and sits on his deck chair there in Finland. Okay, now number 7 will probably come as a bit of a surprise to some, with many expecting him higher up the list and probably a few expecting him lower down as well. But to me, having Charles Leclerc at number 7 is just right. Now, there's no denying that this guy is one of the biggest talents we've seen in a long time. But, so far this year, it hasn't always gone his way. In qualifying, he has struggled initially against his teammate, especially, when getting to Q3. He has, however, noted this is a development point a few races back, and there has been an incredible improvement from his side. I mean, if you think about his pole position in Austria and even his 3rd place starting position in England, I thought that lap from him at Silverstone was a spectacular lap. The fact that he got so close to Hamilton and Bottas in a much stronger Mercedes, I thought was really, really impressive. Now, he was a bit of a qualifying king when he was in Formula 2, so I really do expect, Leclerc to start doing better and better and better the more he gets used to of this new environment that he's in at Ferrari. Now, he's also had a few lows this year. Obviously, the most famous one in Baku in Azerbaijan, where he crashed into the wall in Q2, and in Monaco, where he fell out in Q1, but I guess Ferrari was a bit more to blame there. And then in Canada, where he was just comprehensively outperformed by his teammates by, I think, about 6 or 7 tenths. So in terms of the race, I think it's pretty similar to how things are going in qualifying. He's had some amazing performances like in Bahrain and in Britain. But, it's been offset with a few less good performances, like obviously Monaco, where he retired due to some severe damage, and to a lesser extent in Australia and China, where he was just a bit lackluster. Like he was sort of, think a bit about how Valtteri Bottas was at some points during, last year's season, where he would just sort of sit in 4th and 5th and get the race done, not really challenge the guys in front. But again, he's now on a run of 4 straight podiums, so it seems like he's definitely in the ascendancy. I do think he would have expected to win a race at this point, however, and obviously, in both Bahrain and in Austria, I think it was so close. So I think it is definitely something that's going to happen soon for him, and I think we can all hold thumbs. Now, in terms of the battle against his teammate, now this is a bit of a complicated affair, and it's also, I think, a bit more complicated than what the stats suggest, because Sebastian Vettel leads 6-4 in qualifying and 6-4 in the race. So actually Vettel has, if you look at the raw stats like that, been the stronger driver up to now. But I think we have to be honest and say that Ferrari's strategy and team orders, especially right at the beginning, it wasn't kind to Charles. And also, more often than not, Charles has actually been the faster driver throughout the race weekend. So even obviously in races where he didn't do as well as Vettel on the Sunday, he was actually the faster Ferrari driver throughout. But, due to his own mistakes or Ferrari's mistakes, he lost out when it counted most. But Leclerc's most recent performances against Vettel shows that, his consistency is back and that Vettel needs to be afraid. Very, very afraid. Now, I think lastly, my last thoughts about Charles Leclerc is, while he is currently 7th on my list, I think given his ascendancy. And I think ever since Monaco, he's really just been improving race after race after race. I think the chances are good that he's going to be much higher up this list come the end of the year. So I think we can all look forward to that. All right, so my number 6 driver for 2019 so far is Valtteri Bottas. Now, again, this might come as a bit of a surprise to some, especially, given his very strong performances at the beginning of the year, especially thinking about Australia and Azerbaijan, but let me explain. In qualifying, he's been incredible. He's been really, really incredible. I mean, to hang around with Hamilton and beat him to pole as consistently as he's been doing is really impressive. I mean, he's also, if you think about, over the whole race weekend, so Friday practice and Saturday FP3 and then qualifying, he's been on it throughout, where, Hamilton will struggle here and struggle there and, just have a bit of a horrid time, especially during practice, and then, sometimes wake up for Saturday and Sunday and then sort of fix everything right at the end to be competitive again, where Bottas has just been on it from the start, consistently fast, pushing Hamilton to catch up all the time. And, I think it's been a really, really impressive performance in terms of raw one-lap pace from Bottas this year. And again, for some of the races, it's been incredible as well. I think about Australia and Azerbaijan and Baku, but this is why he's not higher up the list. He has lost the race from pole position in China and in Spain and in the UK. And I feel that's a bit of a poor thing to have on your CV. And then also his race pace is just not as strong as his teammates. He struggles with keeping his tires going. He struggles to manage his fuel. He uses a lot more fuel than Hamilton during the race. And I think also if you think about the races that Hamilton has won usually with 15 to 20 seconds. He's 15 to 20 seconds ahead of everybody else. Where, if Bottas wins the race, if you think about when he won in Azerbaijan, he won by about a second or just more than a second. And obviously in Australia, he won by a bigger margin, but Hamilton had damage to his car, so not really representative there. And I think the key here for Bottas is just comparing him to his very, very illustrious and decorated teammates. And here are the statistics. So Hamilton leads 6-4 in qualifying. So despite Bottas's brilliance so far in qualifying, and he's probably his strongest sort of aspect of his season, Hamilton is still ahead in that regard. And then Hamilton leads 7-3 in race results. So he's obviously outperformed Bottas more frequently in the race than in qualifying. And I think this also reflects, the fact that Bottas's race performances have been slightly worse than his performances in qualifying. And he is now quite a bit behind his teammate in the overall Drivers' Championship. And I think, a last couple of thoughts on Bottas. It's telling when Merc has an off weekend. So when Mercedes is struggling a bit in terms of, pace and not, and I obviously say struggling relatively because usually we classify them as struggling when they're not dominating way ahead of the field. But, Bottas tends to fall away then, and Hamilton, can still bring something out of the car and get the car on the podium, even though they technically didn't always have the raw pace to properly compete with everybody else. I guess Austria was a bit of an exception here, but in general, that's sort of been the tendency. And then we need to ask ourselves, can Bottas fight back this year for the championship? I guess we'll have to see, but Hamilton has quite the grip on the overall championship, and Esteban Ocon, he's waiting in the wings, so I think Bottas still needs to step up his game by quite a bit to be sure to keep his seat for the coming seasons. Okay, so now we move into the top 5, and I'm very excited about all of these 5 drivers, and I think all of them have done really, really well so far this year. And in 5th place is you old Australian, Daniel Ricciardo. Now, after the shock, of Ricciardo moving to Renault subsiding, I think we can all agree that his season with them so far, it has been up and down. But I think the most important thing here is to note that it's not been up and down because of his performances. It's been up and down because of his team's reliability gremlins and, let's just say, performance output. But, Daniel has been consistently excellent, especially, after the first 2-3 races where he was still finding his feet. And I think he's shown this year why he's still a force to be reckoned with, especially in terms of qualifying. I mean, his 4th place in Canada was one of the laps of the season, I think. He out-qualified both Valtteri Bottas and Pierre Gasly, both of them had much faster machinery. And that should be applauded, I feel. And, other than that, when Renault's had the pace, he's put in the lap required and he's starting high up in the midfield consistently. I think he's really been, along with Lando Norris, probably the top midfield qualifier so far this year. And in terms of the actual race, it took him a while to fully get to grips with his new machine, but I think since then he's really, he's put in worthy, consistent performances. His race in Canada again springs to mind, and he also did an excellent job in Silverstone, where he qualified well and then finished the race strong despite having a bit of a strategy disadvantage with the safety car. He was still able to get those good points, and I think, put Renault in a good position still in their battle with McLaren for the best of the race championship. And I think also he has had some reliability issues, and he's bounced back and he's still racing strong. And I think he's just in a much better place emotionally than what he was at Red Bull last year. Now, lastly, and I think most importantly as to why he is so far up this list, is his performances against Nico Hülkenberg, who is a very strong driver in his own right. Now, just for some context, Hülkenberg has been the strongest midfield performer over the last couple of years, and the fact that Daniel is leading him 8-2 in qualifying, which is scary to think about, and 6-4 in race results speaks volumes. Now, it just also shows how good of a driver Hülkenberg is to, turn being behind 8-2 after, on the Saturday, and then still performing well in the race to lessen that gap to a 6-4, ratio for Ricciardo, means that, Hülkenberg is a very strong driver. And I think, and I don't know if this is really fair or not, but I think Daniel Ricciardo's performances has really sort of put a lot of pressure on Nico Hülkenberg for this year to keep his drive at Renault for the coming seasons, because I think, now that they have the star driver in Daniel Ricciardo, Hülkenberg really needs to step up and show his talents, because it's not going to be easy. Now, the last question is, I guess we need to ask ourselves is, can Renault and Ricciardo go all the way to the top? Time will tell as usual, but I think if Daniel Ricciardo keeps putting in performances like he's been doing, they really have a very good shot of doing something great in the future. Now, number 4 driver on the list is the youngest driver on our list, and that's old Lando Norris, who drives for McLaren. And, he's one half of a duo that has taken F1 by storm this year, coupled with the resurgent McLaren team. And, it's been a pretty exciting start for the rookie from the UK. He is a qualifying machine. In terms of consistent one-lap pace, he's probably one of the best so far this year, always getting the McLaren as far up the order as it can go, really. And he also doesn't seem fazed by the pressure, and he can deliver consistently. And, he started 4th in Austria, and I think he started high up in a few other races as well. So he's really, thereabouts. Whenever there's an opportunity, Lando Norris is going to put his car right up in the standings. Now, in race mode, he's been very good as well. I think, if you think about, him and Lewis Hamilton going side by side in Austria, and Lando Norris wasn't fazed or wasn't, intimidated. He can hold his own wheel to wheel, and I think that's very, very impressive. I think it probably would have looked even more impressive if his teammate wasn't the absolute machine on a Sunday than what he was this year. Carlos Sainz, he has also had a blinder over 2019, and the tail of the tape between Sainz and Norris is split down the middle. Now, Norris leads 7-3 in qualifying, which, underlines his pace against a teammate who is no slouch. Like, Carlos Sainz is not a bad qualifier, and he's very fast over one lap, and Norris leading 7-3 is actually crazy. But when you look at race performances, it's the other way around, with Sainz leading 7-3, which is also crazy if you think about it. Now, this is not the full story, because Lando Norris did have a few reliability problems, although Sainz did have as well, if you think about Australia and then his bad luck in Bahrain. But Norris was on for strong results in both Britain and in France until strategy and reliability hampered him. So I think, Norris has, especially if you think about, it's his first year, his rookie season, and his consistency and excellence in each and every race has really been impressive. Now he's tied for ninth in the championship with Daniel Ricciardo, and given that this is his first season, as I've mentioned, against a very formidable teammate, he's really doing amazingly well. So well done, Lando Norris. And speaking about formidable teammates, number 3 on my list is Carlos Sainz. Now the man from Spain got off to a bit of a slow start in Australia, but a few amazing performances during the last couple of races. It's meant that he's well ahead in the midfield battle, and he's sitting in 7th in the World Championship, which is obviously other than the top 3 teams, which means he's best of the rest. Now, in qualifying terms, Carlos is strong, if a little bit inconsistent, especially if you measure him against his teammate, who's just been brilliant. I mean, Norris has been brilliant. He's been clocking in the 5th, 6th, and 7th positions constantly. But I think we all know that Sainz's real strength this year has been his performances during the race, where, in an incredibly consistent and closely contested midfield, he has finished best of the rest most often. If you think about his drive in Austria from way back on the grid to finish 7th, and then his most recent performance during the British Grand Prix to go from 13th to 6th, I mean, that's really, really impressive and amazing performances. And I think if you think about the caliber of drivers in the midfield that he's up against in terms of Daniel Ricciardo, Nico Hülkenberg, Kimi Räikkönen, all of those are very, very strong and experienced racers. And he's, starting behind them and finishing in front of them more often than not, which is really, really impressive. And I think, even if you think about, in Bahrain, where Sainz was running in 6th place and he was properly battling Max Verstappen up until, Sainz got a puncture, which ruined his race. But I think also Sainz is probably one of the best starters on the grid. Since, if you think about it's when last did you see Sainz go back or lose positions, after the opening lap? Almost always you can see he's starting, maybe in 13th or 12th after not such a good qualifying performance. And then, after the first 2 or 3 laps, you see he's back in the points already and competing with the drivers he's supposed to be competing with. And I think that's a very, very nice skill to have, and something that reminds, I think, all of us of, his hero, Fernando Alonso, and how he used to be in terms of getting race starts and taking advantage of the chaos right at the beginning of the race. Now, I've already discussed Sainz's performance against his teammate, but the fact that he can, change a 7-3 deficit in qualifying to a 7-3 advantage during the race is testament to how well Sainz is driving. I think Red Bull made a big mistake to let him go so easily a few years ago, and I think the fact that McLaren has confirmed both Sainz and Norris for 2020 already shows how well they've been performing and how much McLaren values them and their contribution to the team. So, I've said well done Lando Norris, well done Carlos Sainz for a really, really strong performance and really showing a lot of doubters why he deserves to be in Formula One and in a top team, because I always felt, and I mentioned this during one of my earlier episodes as well, that Sainz is quite an underrated driver and he deserves more respect. And I think this year he's really, really showing us that, what he's made of. So really, really good for him. Now, number 2, hide your children, hide your wives. It's Lewis Hamilton. And, since the championship leader is not number 1 on this list, I expect, an angry mob at my door, or in my comment section rather. So, it is what it is. And I think by this stage, you can all guess who is going to be on top of my list. But, for the 3 simpletons that haven't figured it out yet, let's keep the suspense going. So, Mr. Hamilton, in terms of qualifying, so far, not his best. I think that's the best way to summarize it. He's been great in Australia and in Monaco. Other than that, it's been pretty meh. I mean, it's been average. And I think he's very open about the fact that he hasn't really performed as well as he should have in qualifying. And I think sort of a general theme for him over the year is just he sort of struggles over the whole weekend to get his car where he wants it to be, and he makes little mistakes here and there, and it's just sort of a bit of a scruffy and messy sessions, and it takes him quite a while to figure out sort of or get his car where he needs it to be for qualifying and for the race. And I think the fact that he has only had 3 pole positions this year with by far and away the best car, it speaks of the high standards that he usually sets for himself, and then also it speaks of how well Bottas has been performing. But, he's just really not been the qualifying machine that we used to. I mean, he's probably, if not the best, one of the best qualifiers of all time. So I think it's been strange to see him struggle like this year. But I think conversely, the race, if you think about, how he does on the Sunday, he's been as strong as ever, if not stronger than ever. With, if you with the exception of Australia, maybe, where he had a bit of damage, and Austria, where his car was overheating, his race pace has been top class. He's been proper fast on the Sunday. If he has the fastest car on the weekend, he is unbeatable on the Sunday. I think he's unbeatable. If he doesn't have the fastest car, he's still so quick over a race distance that he's still able to put himself into a position to win. If you think about, in Bahrain, where he overtook Vettel, where Vettel, the Ferrari, was the faster car that weekend. And obviously in Canada, where he was just hounding Vettel lap after lap after lap, that eventually obviously led to a Vettel mistake, but let's not open that can of worms now. I think his performance at Silverstone was ridiculous. I think he was so much faster than everybody else during that race. Even, Bottas can say as much as he wants that the safety car cost him the victory, but Hamilton was way quicker than what he was. There's no way that Bottas would have been able to keep Hamilton behind all of that, all that time, even without the safety car. So I think his race pace there was just scary. And I think in terms of how clinical he is now, the way he can look after the tires, the way he uses less fuel than his teammates, he's economical, and that he can still consistently pump in the fastest laps is just, it's scary if you think about it. He's, I think, without a doubt, the most complete race driver at the moment, or on the current grid. And he just doesn't have a weakness on a Sunday. I don't think he has a weakness during the race. I think for him to lose a race, he has to have reliability issues, or his car needs to be a lot slower than the others on the day, because he really, really, really is very, very strong over a race distance. Now, compared to his teammates, and I've mentioned this a few times now, his qualifying has been okay. He has less pole positions than Bottas, but he still beats him more often than not, which means that he can still extract performance from the car, even if they don't necessarily have the outright qualifying advantage. Now, in the race, as I mentioned, he's really strong. He's done better in 7 out of the 10 races. And I think it's no wonder he's leading the championship. He's just so consistently strong, and he's always there or thereabouts to score good points. And I think the really scary part is that the first half of the year is usually where Hamilton is weaker. And he's probably just going to become stronger and stronger and stronger as the year progresses. So, never say never, but I think Hamilton is in a very strong position for this year in terms of winning the championship. And now, ladies and gentlemen, our number one for the 2 people, that didn't figure it out yet is Max Verstappen. Now, I think Max cleaned up his act this year. As simple as that. He's fast in qualifying. He's brilliant and decisive and patient during the races. He has really not made a mistake this whole year. I think the only slight mistake was a crash in Austria, free practice 2, which obviously didn't have such a big impact. He is the man of the moment. I think it's as easy as that. He is really, really driving at a high level. And I think next to Hamilton, he's operating at an extremely, extremely high level of efficiency and speed. So, there's not much I can say about his qualifying performance other than he's basically put that Red Bull as far up the grid as possible for each and every race. And that's all the team can ask of you. If you can maximize your performance during qualifying for each and every race, then you're doing what you're supposed to do. And if you think about his race performances, obviously the one in Austria was insane. But again, he really hasn't been making many mistakes during any of the other Grand Prix. Even after starting 11th in Canada, with Red Bull messing up the strategy a bit and sending him out on the mediums, he still produced an excellent drive to finish 5th. And I think, the final nail in the coffin is just the fact that his performances against his teammate is a bit of a joke. He's been out-qualified once in 10 races. And that one time was in Canada where, didn't really have a chance to even compete with Gasly because Red Bull sent Verstappen out on the medium tires in Q2. And then it turns out Verstappen, wasn't quite fast enough, or the Red Bull wasn't quite fast enough for that to work. And then they had to send him out again on the soft tires. And then just before he was able to complete his lap, Kevin Magnussen had a crash and they red flagged the session, and then Verstappen never had the opportunity to actually do his qualifying run. So even that one time that Gasly beat Verstappen in qualifying wasn't really like a proper victory. And Gasly has also only beaten Verstappen once over a race distance, which was the British Grand Prix last week, and that's also only because Vettel crashed into the back of Verstappen, and I guess Gasly was able to capitalize on that. Now, is Verstappen that good, or has Gasly just been that bad? I think it's definitely a bit of both, but I think if you're Pierre Gasly and you have to contend with the current force that is Max Verstappen, you'd struggle too. Now, I think my parting thought on this would just be to maybe mention that Christian Horner, who is obviously the Red Bull team principal, came out the other day and to much uproar said that Verstappen is now the best driver over the past 12 months given his performances. Now, I think there's definitely a case to be made, but I think people do have a bit of a short memory when it comes to driver form and driver performances. And I think if you think about how Hamilton performed over the second half of last year, that was scary how good Hamilton was then. And even this year, Hamilton is still operated at a very high level. And I think, granted, Max has been as strong as well. I think the second half of 2018 for Verstappen was also very, very good and strong. If you think about how well he drove in Brazil and some of the other places, Mexico as well, which he won. And this year, obviously, Max has been flawless. I think really he's been incredibly strong. But I think the main difference and the one argument to make against the fact that Max has been the strongest driver over the past 12 months is the fact that Max can mostly, I think, drive without pressure, or let's say external pressure. Obviously, he still has internal pressure. But Red Bull isn't the championship contending team at the moment. Obviously, they are up there. They can win races when the stars align, but they are not competing for the championship at the moment. And that takes a whole lot of pressure off you as a driver. If you're Max Verstappen, if you know that, listen, the world championship at the moment is not really an achievable goal, then you can just drive free and try and maximize your performance, over a weekend, where Hamilton has had to generate these amazing performances under the most extreme pressures of fighting for a title, with fighting with Ferrari and Vettel last year, and trying to, after not being the faster car, actually Mercedes last year, especially the first half or the first 2/3, Hamilton had to operate under all of that pressure and fight for the championship, and despite that, still was able to drive as well as he did. So I think the real acid test for Max Verstappen is going to be if he does end up in a title fight with someone like Hamilton, and with all of the mind games and the emotions and the manipulation and the drama that goes along with fighting for a championship, then I think we're really going to see what Max is made of and how good of a driver and how good of an all-round package he really, really is. But I guess that's something to look forward to in the future. And I can't wait. I really hope Red Bull can you sort of bridge that final gap and really become a team that can compete with Mercedes on a consistent basis. Okay, folks, so there's my list. Do you agree or disagree? Are you clutching your pearls in distress over the fact that Sebastian Vettel didn't make my top 10? Please go and voice your displeasure in the comments section of whichever platform you're listening this on, and I'll explain calmly and rationally why Vettel doesn't deserve to be in this top 10. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a review or a rating. If you really enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, and I promise I'll keep you entertained for the second half of the season and for the coming F1 seasons as well. You can find me on Twitter, where my handle is @TF1Show, and on Instagram, where my handle is @TheTF1Show. Now, I'm super excited for the upcoming German Grand Prix, and I hope you'll join me as the weekend ramps up. I'll see you all next week. Bye.